The first ever character to appear on the show of Ninjago was Master Wu. Him walking up to 4 weapons in Ignatia will forever be iconic. And even outside of that, Wu has taken on a massive role within the show of Ninjago. He has had many fantastic scenes and many amazing moments. He is a vital aspect to the show. But the thing is that over the course of the years, there has been a lot of criticism surrounding Wu regarding how he handles the ninja, how he has handled villains, and how he has handled certain situations across the board. So in similar vein to my video about Misako, which got so much more love than I could have ever expected, I'm going to do the exact same for Wu, analyze a fairly controversial character, and decide whether or not he should have the criticisms that has been lent to him. And honestly, I think I'm going to be a lot more positive in this one in comparison to Misako. So let's sit back, relax, and let's take a look at some of the main criticisms when it does come to Master Wu, and let's provide some sort of argument as to how you could take away those criticisms and truly decide whether or not Wu is a bad teacher or even just a bad person in general. Now these criticisms in question all come down to one recurring theme, and it is how Wu treats the people that are around him, whether it's the ninja, whether it's the villains, whether it's allies, or whether it's just simply put civilians. There is a lot of different instances where Wu's treatment of those around him really does call him into question. Starting off with the ninja, there have been multiple instances of Wu doing something towards the team as a whole or to one of the ninja individually that just really never sat right with the community. There are a lot of these examples that have to do with the ninja that also have to do with the villains, and some of them I'm going to leave for a little later, but as of now there are 2 very big examples for how Wu compromised the team as a whole simply down to his own actions. The first one is without a doubt Moro. The thing is that the ninja were beyond unprepared when it does come to the Master of Wind. The ninja just simply never even knew that Wu had a student before them, and it did cause a lot of different issues when it did come to Season 5. And Wu just kind of never really cared about the fact that he just didn't tell the ninja about Moro. But the thing is that it is ultimately defendable. Of course, Wu's lack of knowledge that he gave to the ninja is a big factor, but ultimately Wu could never have anticipated Moro returning from the cursed realm. The thing is that he thought Moro by all accounts was gone. There was no reason to ever suggest that Wu would have needed to worry about Moro once again, but ultimately speaking, he was wrong. And the thing is that it doesn't even have to be a case of Wu never told them just because Moro was no longer around. The thing is that generally speaking, it is really weird to note that Wu just decided to never tell the ninja that he had a student before them. This also does apply to the second ninja and villain example, and it is Asphira. Again, it's another instance of Wu, by all accounts, creating a villain. The thing is that Wu kind of manufactured Asphira in a very weird way. Of course, Wu was a child when it happened, but the thing is that it still very much was the case. And again, it's something that just simply never came up in conversation when it did come to the ninja, and it again led to so many of the actions that occurred within Season 11. This one definitely had much more of a dire effect because Wu not telling the ninja about Asphira did lead to Zane going to the Netherrealm. So this was definitely a more important case of Wu's lack of teachings when it does come to the ninja leading to something disastrous happening. Honestly, it is a very big example on why people don't think Wu is exactly a good person, or at the very least a bad teacher, because the lack of lessons led to so many disastrous consequences. But again, with Asphira, you could still argue the fact that Wu just simply would have never have needed to tell the ninja about her. The thing is that she was locked up for thousands of years. Again, Wu probably just assumed that she would never have been a factor at any point of his life. It's really weird to think about, but I honestly do kind of understand the side of Wu here. It's honestly by all accounts weird. The fact that the ninja just simply never knew is weird in both instances, but the thing is that it is a case of he probably just didn't assume it would ever be a factor. So it's definitely a more debatable instance, but I don't think this is a definitive outright sign of Wu exactly being a bad person. The other group scenario I did want to talk about is when Wu in Season 13 just tells the ninja that he's simply no longer going to be their master. Of course, he has done this a couple times in the past, but this time in particular felt extremely weird, because not only was he just refusing to teach the ninja anymore, the thing is that he was just telling them to go and do their own thing. He by all account gave up, and of course you could attribute it to Wu's mental health, but the thing is that in this instance, he was just kind of being selfish. Wu just kind of refused to interact throughout the course of season 13. Again, of course it was his plot and it was this whole thing of getting back in the groove, but it really did come across as selfish, because regardless of the fact it was a plot for Wu in the season, it does really represent Wu in a very different light. It just shows Wu as being a bad teacher. But again, you can see Wu's point from a certain perspective. If he simply was in a bad place mentally, and he also believed that the ninja was strong enough without him, I can understand why he justified it to himself. But I definitely think this is a more definitive instance of Wu being a bad teacher at the minimum. It's really interesting to think about, because it does show that even though Wu is a wise teacher and he has done a lot of good for the ninja, there are so many instances of him doing bad. Because whilst those group examples do exist, I do want to give one particular example to one particular scene from the show. And honestly, this one did change a lot for me when it does come to Wu, and it's from season 6. Nia has a scene where she's talking about how she felt like she never had an identity. And the thing is that Nia talks about how she wanted to be Samurai X, but Wu told her no, she had to be the water ninja. And the thing is that you can attribute this to being Nia's account of it, and you may call the validity of it into question. But if we do take this conversation between her and Wu at heart, the thing is that this never happened really in season 5. Of course, Nia wanted to go back to being Samurai X, but she never actually has that conversation with Wu as far as we know, and it sounds like Wu just wanted specifically to become a ninja. So it honestly sounds to me like Nia and Wu had a conversation about her identity between season 5 and 6, and she wanted to become more than just the water ninja, and she wanted to continue on her own mantle, but Wu sounds like he refused to let her do so. And honestly, if this is the case, it is extremely weird when it does come down to it, because it's basically Wu telling Nia that she can't be who she truly wanted to be. Of course it does work out in the end, and she seems fairly comfortable being the water ninja now, but at the time, it sounds like Nia just didn't really want the mantle, but it sounds like Wu didn't really give her much of a choice. This does retroactively kind of give Nia a lot of reasoning for how angry she was in season 6. Of course, we get to hear about how frustrated she is throughout the course of that season, but it definitely does add an extra layer of meaning. It definitely does give this further impression on where Nia was at. And if you do consider the idea that she wanted to be Samurai X, but she was not allowed because of Wu, it really does change your perspective on a lot of different aspects. But in particular, how Wu treats the ninja in general, because it really sounds like he just straight up told her no. But again, there is defense for this. The thing is that if Wu deemed it so he had to have the Master of Water still around, he may have just taken the hard approach when it did come to Nia. But I do honestly think this is a situation where there's not really much defending it. It really does come across as Wu being rude, very dismissive, and a lot of different things when it does come to Nia specifically. And honestly, it really is not looking good for him. But those are the main examples for me when it does come to how Wu treats the ninja. So let's take a look at another perspective. And this is how Wu handles certain villains and certain events throughout the course of the show. There are two particular examples that really shows the mentality of Wu, and really makes him come across as someone who is kind of ignorant, almost arrogant, and again, just not really that good of a person in a weird way. The first example is definitely the Time Twins. The thing is that Wu had 40 years to prep for that fight with the Chronics. He had plenty of time to consider what he was going to do, how he was going to do it, etc. The thing is though, is that after all of that time, he chose to just wait and just hope that he could defeat a Chronics there and then. And like I said, it goes back to this point of arrogance, but it also does go to show not only how he treats a Chronics in a weird way, but again kind of relates back to the ninja once more. The thing is that Wu just kind of foolishly assumes that he can just get rid of the fight. He can get rid of a Chronics for good and just eliminate the Hands of Time. But the thing is that he was vastly unprepared for it, and he never had any sort of contingency in mind. He told Lloyd ultimately that he was going to the monastery to finish a fight, but the thing is that he had no backup plan. What if he lost the fight? Which he did. And that's honestly the really big point. He completely underestimated the Chronics, which is another argument, like I said, when it does come to arrogance, but he just completely disregards the fact that he trained the ninja to be able to help him in these situations. But no, he weirdly thought he could just handle it on himself, and he does acknowledge that he made a mistake in the moment, but it's only after he got defeated. It's a really weird analogy for just simply Wu's mentality. He thought he could just defeat an enemy 40 years later just because. The thing is that he just blindly assumes that the problem isn't actually a problem, and it does go to show that he may not necessarily be a bad person because of it, but he's definitely a flawed character at best, and definitely shows that he doesn't exactly treat the people around him with enough respect if it does come to certain situations. And the thing is that this is just an example from Season 7. There's also an example in Dragon's Rising. Not only was Wu aware of the fact that the merge was going to happen and the fact that he was actively researching to prevent it or cause it to happen depending on what theory you believe, the thing is that Wu just absolutely told no one what was going to happen. Even during the event of the merge itself, the ninja were asking him for questions and asking him for what was actually happening, and he just didn't answer those questions. He just sat there to himself, and there is a defense for it, but the thing is that ultimately speaking, he never really gets the ninja in the knowledge of what was truly happening. And even in Dragon's Rising, years later, they're still trying to piece together what Wu already knew. It goes back to this ultimate point of just Wu believing that these threats are just nothing to him. He can do it on his own, he doesn't need the people around him. It again goes to speak to an arrogance about Wu. Honestly, it is really interesting to see that he just consistently believes that he can do whatever he needs to, and it doesn't matter who's around him. It is really jarring when you look at it in this frame, because you look at this character who's meant to be this all-wise master, and you see him make these decisions, which ultimately is the exact opposite. But like I said, there is, by all accounts, technically a defense to it. When it does come to the merge, if you believe he was trying to prevent it, there's not really much of one, but if you believe he was trying to cause it, he wouldn't tell the ninja that. The thing is that he just wouldn't let them know at all. And in the event of the Time Twins, maybe he assumed that the fight was going to play out very differently. Maybe he didn't realize that the Time Twins simply wouldn't have aged within the time vortex. So he thought he was going to continue to face someone that was his own age. There are a lot of different hypotheticals that you could consider, that Wu considered, but ultimately speaking, it definitely isn't something that's very defendable. Because even if Wu assumed that Acronyx wouldn't be much of a threat, or the merge maybe wouldn't have been a threat, the thing is that he still could have made the ninja aware of it, and I do think that is the biggest point above all else. It goes back to this ultimate point I've already made of Wu just not treating anyone around him ultimately with respect. So we've talked about how Wu's lack of respect for the ninja in certain instances makes him a bit of a bad teacher and a bad person. We've talked about how his arrogance has made him a bit of a bad teacher and a bad person. But let's talk about the last thing, the ignorance of Wu, and how it makes him a bad teacher and also a bad person. This is mainly down to the hypocrisy of Wu. In the pilot of the show, and also at the very end in Crystallize, you will note that he has a callback to the very same thing, and it very much demonstrates his ignorance towards certain situations. In the pilot, when he gathers the ninja, who were fairly young at the time, he instructs them to go and find the golden weapons, which he hid himself. But the thing is that he also knows that he had them protected by dragons. So his ignorance caused the ninja to walk in unknowingly into elemental dragons. Honestly, it is really jarring in retrospect that Wu just kind of allowed this to happen. He allowed them to walk in on a deadly trap that he himself set. It is really weird to think that he allowed that to happen. And not only did he allow it, the only thing that actually got the ninja out of the Caves of Despair, which was the Scythe of Quakes, he condemned the ninja for actually using it. So not only was he ignorant, he again just didn't really care for the ninjas' lives. But you may think he learned from this situation and went forward and did better. Not at all, because in Crystallized, you will see the conversation that he had with Lil Nelson, where he absolutely cooks Wu. Wu has all of the children around him, and they're offering to help, and he says he's not going to lead kids against the force of darkness. And Lil Nelson just replies that he did it before. It's a callback to the pilot, and a very funny scene, but has really weird implications, because Wu not only doesn't realize that what he did in the pilots was wrong, Wu then immediately goes back on his stance, and he leads kids against the forces of evil. Of course, he is kind of proven wrong in this moment, so he may feel an obligation to, but the fact is that not only did he do it once out of ignorance, he basically does it twice out of ignorance, which goes to show how Wu just doesn't really look at the lives around him in a really weird way. Again, there is by all accounts defense for both of these actions in both the pilots and Crystallize. You could argue in both instances there was no other choice, and it was simply a situation where if they didn't do it, they may no longer have their lives. And I do understand that to an extent, but I would still argue that Wu's ignorance in this situation is definitely on full display. And I do think that is the biggest point above all else. Like I said, I covered his attitude and his judgment, I covered his arrogance, and it also goes to show that he does have ignorance. It does all come together to meld together a very controversial character, and even though I have brought defenses to it, it has definitely been a very interesting case. Because I do think, unlike Misako, Wu definitely did have more stronger arguments going for him, but it does lead to the ultimate question: is Wu a bad person? Not necessarily. I think he's just kind of a flawed human being. The thing is that he did so much that also could be considered wrong, but at the time I don't think Wu really considered it. He's not outright evil like a lot of people have started to theorize. The thing is that he's just kind of flawed and he just makes a lot of mistakes, and I feel like judging him accordingly wouldn't exactly be a good thing. Is he a bad teacher? Yeah. I would honestly say he is, because regardless, a lot of the lessons that they learned from villains and a lot of things that he had to tell the ninja after something bad happened is astonishingly high. And the thing is that he could have just simply got ahead with it just by being more transparent. But the thing is that he just simply never decided to, and I do think that is the biggest issue above all else. So on an overall, I think there is a lot of arguments and there's a lot of sway when it does come to Wu. I do think there's a lot of back and forth, but ultimately speaking, even though I think he's a very flawed teacher, I do think he is not a bad person. But this is where I want to pass it off to you guys. I'm very curious as to know if you believe that Wu is a bad person when you take all this information into account. I do think there is a lot of argument going one way or the other. This is definitely not Misako, where it definitely felt very much leaning into one direction. But ultimately, this is why the topic is very interesting to look at, because I do think Wu is going to cause a lot more debate. And I definitely want to know what you guys think of it, and also, do you just simply believe Wu's a bad person? Because in the end, no matter how you look at it, Wu has done many good things throughout the course of his life. He does do bad things, but that's just simply how it goes down. I do think at the end of the day, he is a good person. He's just flawed. But that is why I want to pass it off to you guys, and I do hope you enjoyed me taking a look at Wu when it does come to this video. Let me know if you want to see more like this, because this is a definite fun topic to explore. And I do hope if you did enjoy the video, you would consider subscribing. I would love to have more people to discuss Ninjago with. And also, if you do want to support the channel any further, which you don't have to, you could always consider becoming a channel member. You could join the legends on screen, and in a particular shout out to Grandmaster Sensei 28208 for being an eternal legend. Thank you very much, my friend. But that is about it for today, you guys, and thank you very much for watching. Take care. Okay,